The chandeliers inside the Strathmore Hotel glittered like suspended galaxies, each crystal teardrop catching light and scattering it across the ballroom in soft constellations. The place was a cathedral of ambition that evening. Polished marble floors, champagne the color of late summer sunlight, designer gowns flowing like liquid silk across the room. Everything smelled of power, of arrival, of futures being planned in whispers. And in the center of it all, Amara Cole stood very still. Her hand rested lightly on the stem of a champagne flute, though she hadn't taken a sip. Not yet. She was watching, listening, breathing as though each inhale needed to be measured carefully, like any excess might crack the polished shell she'd worn for years. Across the room, under the golden glow of a chandelier, Elias Ward was laughing. Her husband, the man she had once admired so deeply she believed the two of them could remake the shape of success itself. The man she had built alongside, step by relentless step, late nights and early mornings, spreadsheets and sleepless strategy sessions. Tonight, he was radiant, suit tailored to perfection, smile effortless, posture relaxed in a way that spoke of comfort and applause. He had become everything the world celebrated, and he was not standing beside her. Instead, his hand rested with gentle familiarity at the small of another woman's back. Vivian Hale, curator of the Hale Gallery. Golden hair swept into a low chignon, lips painted the color of wine in winter. She looked like the world's idea of elegance, the kind that photographs well, the kind that doesn't need explaining, the kind the industry welcomed with instinctive grace. Amara could feel the quiet glances ripple toward her, subtle, polite, wrapped in social nicety but sharpened with fascination. Someone behind her whispered, not loud, but loud enough. So he finally found someone who fits his image. A soft laugh followed, touched with pity. No, he just grew past where he started. Happens. People evolve. No one mentioned race. No one needed to. Amara's grip on her champagne glass tightened, but she didn't look away. Her face remained composed, exquisite in its stillness. Her skin, deep mahogany with undertones of gold, seemed almost luminous under the overhead lighting. Her hair, worn in thick crowned twists, framed her like something sculpted, intentional, regal. If they thought she would break, they misunderstood her entirely. But inside, beneath all that practiced serenity, something shifted, something small, like the crisp sound of the first thread tearing from a hem, the kind of tear that seems insignificant until the whole seam pulls apart in your hands. Elias leaned in to whisper something to Vivian, and she laughed brightly, her head tipped back, her hand brushing his chest. 8 years of partnership, and here he was, comfortable, unapologetic, as if this were simply the natural progression of things. Amara inhaled slowly. She remembered other nights, cheaper rooms, louder streets, shared bowls of takeout meals eaten cross-legged on the floor of their tiny apartment in Hyde Park. Elias with ink smudged on his fingers from sketching prototypes. Amara building financial models by hand. Hope had been their sustenance then, faith their currency. She had believed in him when belief was the only thing he had. And tonight, he didn't look at her once. She did not cry. She did not leave. She did not confront. She simply stood in her emerald silk gown, a color chosen to emphasize her strength, not soften her existence, and let the realization settle like a stone dropped into deep water. He was erasing her, not loudly, not cruelly, but completely. And the room was letting him. But something else moved inside her too, quiet, steady, ancient. Not fury, not panic. Reclamation, a remembering of herself, of the woman she was before compromise became habit. Amara lifted her chin, eyes clear, breath even. She set the untouched champagne flute down upon a white linen table with the gentlest click, so soft no one heard it, yet final enough to echo in her bones. The ballroom shimmered around her, but she felt grounded, centered, like she had just stepped back into her own body after being away too long. If this was the night she finally saw the truth, then so be it. Better clarity than illusion, better awakening than silence. The music swelled, laughter rose, and the golden light continued to glow. But something fundamental had shifted, and it was not going back. Amara Cole walked out of the ballroom, not quickly, not dramatically, just gracefully, because grace was something she had never needed permission to possess. And as those who watched her fade into the dim corridor beyond the chandeliers felt it, even if they could not name it, the story had just changed. If you felt this moment, this quiet reclaiming, let yourself breathe it in. And if you'd like to follow Amara's journey as she rises beyond this night, stay with us. Your likes, comments, and follows help keep stories like hers alive and seen. Long before the chandeliers and the curated laughter, there were nights when the world felt smaller, softer, and easier to believe in. Amara remembered those nights with exquisite clarity. Hyde Park in late autumn, the air crisp, leaves gathering in warm shades of amber and rust along the sidewalk. She and Elias had lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery where the scent of cinnamon and fresh sourdough rose through the vents at dawn. The cabinets creaked, the water pipes rattled, and the windows whistled on windy evenings. But it was theirs, a place shaped not by resources, but by dreams. Back then, Elias's ambition was fire, undirected, but bright enough to pull others toward it. He spoke of innovation as if it were a calling rather than an industry, mapping out his ideas on napkins, whiteboards, receipts, whatever surface he could find. His hands were always moving, sketching, imagining, reaching. And Amara had loved that about him. She had loved the hunger in him, his belief that the world could be rewritten. Her own talent, cold, precise, elegant, had balanced him. Where his mind ran toward the horizon, hers calculated the ground beneath their feet. She handled numbers like silk thread, delicate, flexible, unbreakable. She built structures, frameworks, timelines. She took the wild brilliance of possibility and fashioned it into something real. Together, they were not lightning and thunder. They were spark and oxygen, the beginning of something incendiary. But growth changes people, or maybe it reveals them. The dimming did not happen in one moment. It happened in micro-adjustments, tiny negotiations of self that felt harmless at the time. It began with laughter. "Baby, maybe soften how you explain things in meetings," Elias had said once, years ago, his tone coated in affection. People get intimidated. She had smiled then, because the request sounded thoughtful, like he was protecting her. So she softened. Then came style, maybe something more understated. Investors like subtle elegance. So she changed her wardrobe. Then came visibility. "I'll take this meeting alone." It's easier for people to understand a single spokesperson. So she stepped back, and each adjustment felt rational, justified, temporary, until it wasn't. One evening, months into the company's rapid expansion, they hosted a small gathering at their apartment. Just 6 people, early investors and partners. Amara had cooked. She had always cooked back then. Coq au vin and roasted potatoes, fresh rosemary from a pot on the small balcony. The kind of meal one makes when love is both the ingredient and the offering. During dinner, one of the newer investors asked Elias, who had developed the company's forecasting models. "Oh, our analytics team handles that," Elias said, not missing a beat. "Not we, not Amara, not the woman sitting 3 feet away." A small silence had opened inside her then, quiet, vast, invisible to everyone but her. After the guests left, she asked him why. He kissed her forehead and said, almost gently, "I didn't want them to think I'm dependent on you." Dependent. That word settled into her like frost. Still, she stayed. She reasoned. She forgave by rewriting the scene in her memory. She told herself it was love making room for growth. But the room kept shrinking. As the company rose, interviews, conferences, features in business magazines, Elias began to wear image like a second skin. He traded in language of branding, optics, perception. He began speaking of himself in the third person. Elias Ward, founder and visionary. The world rewarded him for it. Meanwhile, Amara's contributions were gradually rewritten into footnotes. At a shareholder event, an associate introduced her as Elias's wife. She has a strong interest in tech, too. At a conference, a young journalist asked her how she handled being the supportive partner behind a great man. And Amara, always poised, always gracious, answered in a voice that no longer seemed entirely her own. But there were moments, brief flickers, when Elias looked at her with the old warmth. When they sat on the couch late at night, his head resting against her shoulder, exhausted, whispering the private truths ambition could not touch. When he told her she was the only person he could breathe around, those moments kept her there. Hope is a stubborn thing, but slowly, she began to see how their shared world was no longer shared. The office they had once worked in side by side became his alone. Her title, Chief Strategy Officer, became ceremonial. Her opinions became interruptions. Her brilliance became background. She had not realized how much of herself she had set aside until one evening, during a rare, quiet dinner, she caught her reflection in the restaurant window. The woman looking back at her was elegant, composed, polished to a shine so clean it reflected nothing. She did not look unfamiliar. She looked diminished, and it startled her. Once, she had taken up space effortlessly. She had spoken without adjusting her tone for the comfort of others. She had laughed loudly, worn her hair freely, moved through the world without apology. Now, every expression had been measured, every gesture calibrated, every word filtered through the imagined gaze of others. She had not lost herself all at once. She had set herself down in pieces. So when she saw Elias at the gala, his arm resting gently on Vivian's back, it was not the betrayal that broke her. It was the realization that the slow dimming had not been an accident. She had been fading for years, and he had let her. The night after the gala unfolded with an unsettling quiet, one that did not roar or shatter but seeped. The kind of silence that moves through rooms like a tide retreating, leaving everything exposed. Amara returned to the penthouse late, the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. Elias had not arrived yet. She did not wait for him in the living room, nor in the kitchen, nor anywhere he might expect to find her. Instead, she walked into their bedroom and sat at the edge of the bed, hands resting in her lap, posture still, face calm. But beneath the calm lived a silence so complete it bordered on revelation. When Elias finally came home, the elevator doors whispering open with their usual elegance, he entered with the faint scent of expensive wine and applause still clinging to his clothes. He loosened his tie, shrugging out of the performance of the evening with practiced ease. He saw her and paused. There was no anger in the room, no accusation, just the quiet gravity of something that could no longer be ignored. "You left early," he said, voice carefully neutral. "There was no reason for me to stay," Amara replied. He exhaled, as though the topic were a small and inconvenient one. "Amara." She lifted her gaze to him then, and whatever he intended to say dissolved under the weight of it. Her eyes were not cold. They were not even wounded. They were simply clear. And clarity, in its purest form, is unmistakable. "Elias," she said softly, "are you ashamed of me?" The question did not echo. It landed. He opened his mouth, perhaps to deflect, perhaps to soothe, perhaps to lie. But the truth had always existed in the smallest muscle beneath expression. The flicker before a word forms. In that flicker, she saw it. He hesitated, and the hesitation was the answer. Something inside her shifted, not breaking, not collapsing, just realigning, like bones settling back into their proper structure. "Amara," he began again, slower this time, his tone controlled, measured. "It's not about shame. It's about perception. Optics matter at the level we're operating now. The brand we've built." "We built," she corrected gently but without softness. He blinked. A small, almost imperceptible tension tightened at the corners of his jaw. "Yes," he said, though the word did not carry belief. "But the public needs a certain image. Investors expect someone who looks like her." There was no bitterness in the question, only acknowledgement. His silence was no longer hesitant. It was truth made still. Vivian's name did not need to be spoken. Her presence was already in the room. Elias stepped toward her, frustration rising like heat. "You're taking this the wrong way. You're making it emotional." Amara almost laughed, though nothing about the moment was humorous. "Emotional," she repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. "I gave you 10 years of my life, my expertise, my labor, my identity. I shaped the company's trajectory while you shaped its myth. And now, when the myth demands a different silhouette beside you, you tell me not to make it emotional." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I can't fight the market, Amara. This is simply how the world works. There it was. Not an apology, not regret, just acceptance of a world that rewarded him for discarding what had built him. Amara stood, not abruptly, but with quiet purpose. She stepped closer, close enough that she could see his pulse move just beneath the skin at his throat, close enough to remember the warmth of early years, close enough to know she no longer needed any of it. She asked one final question, not for him but for her own closure. Did you ever intend for me to remain part of the story? His answer was a whisper, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. I didn't think this would matter anymore. The words did not pierce her. They did not wound her. They simply affirmed what her spirit had known long before her mind would admit it. She had already been written out. She stepped back, and something unspooled, cleanly, completely. The last tether broke without violence. Then this is where we stop, she said, voice calm. He looked at her then, with a flicker of something like surprise, perhaps even fear, because he understood, too late, that she was not reacting. She was deciding. Amara did not raise her voice. She did not explain herself. She did not offer him a chance to negotiate. She simply turned, walked to the wardrobe, and opened it. A suitcase rested on the top shelf. She pulled it down with steady hands. Elias watched her, but did not stop her. He knew he had already lost her, and she, quiet, elegant, sovereign, knew it too. The slow dimming was over. Now the light would return, but not here. The morning after her decision did not arrive in a storm. It came quietly, sunlight pale against the bedroom curtains, the city just beginning to stir beneath a sky washed in early dawn blue. Chicago was never gentle, but that morning it felt distant, as though it were a place she was already leaving. Amara did not rush. She folded her clothes with a precise grace, each motion deliberate. Jeans, silk blouses, notebooks filled with her handwriting, calculations in margins, ideas sketched like constellations. The notebooks went into the suitcase last. They were, in a sense, archives of her mind. The empire had always lived, first, on paper. She did not pack everything. She did not need to. She was not fleeing. She was moving. When the zipper closed, the sound was final, but not sad. She carried the suitcase into the living room and set it near the door. Then she sat on the couch and folded her hands, waiting, not with anticipation, but with completion. The air felt clean in her lungs. The world outside had not changed, but she had. Elias walked in sometime after 9. He stopped when he saw the suitcase. His expression passed through several shifts: surprise, irritation, calculation, and finally a cool, practiced neutrality she recognized from boardrooms. "You're leaving." Amara did not stand. "Yes." "Just like that?" She lifted her gaze to him. "Not just like that at all. This has been happening for a very long time. Last night simply gave it a name." He looked away, jaw tense. "We don't need to make any drastic decisions." "Drastic," she repeated softly. "No, Elias. Drastic would be staying." Silence, stretched, thin, sharp. He exhaled, slow, controlled. "We can discuss terms. Equity, compensation, public statement." "I'm not here to negotiate yet," she interrupted. "I'm here to close the door." But truth, even when spoken clearly, rarely ends anything. It only marks the boundary where one must choose. She stood and walked to her desk, the one she had kept in the corner of the living room. Small, unassuming, but central to everything. She opened the drawer and removed a thin folder, placing it on the coffee table. Elias glanced at it, then looked at her, his expression cautious. "What is that?" "Proof," she said, her voice even, "of what we both already know." Inside were copies of emails, strategic memos outlining the company's launch blueprint in her handwriting, early business plans signed by them both, and bank statements, her transfers funding the first manufacturing run. Not suggestions, not shared dreams, documents, evidence of her foundation in the company he now claimed to have built alone. Elias opened the folder slowly, his fingers steady only through practiced control. He scanned the first few pages, and she watched the slight shift in his posture, the smallest tightening at the base of the neck, the smallest flicker in the eyes. The truth had weight, and weight touches the body before the mind acknowledges it. He closed the folder. Not quickly, not defensively, just quietly. "Amara," he said, in a voice stripped of performance, "what are you planning to do?" She took a long, steady breath, not dramatic, not trembling, just alive. "I'm planning to reclaim myself." He looked at her then, not as a partner, not as a rival, but as someone he had underestimated for too long. A realization passed through him, not regret, but awareness. "You're serious," he murmured. "Yes," she said, "and you knew this day would come the moment you stepped away from us." Something moved behind his eyes, something like recognition, something like loss. But he did not reach for her. He did not apologize. He did not try to stop her. Because the part of him that once loved her knew better than to stand in the way of the woman she had always been. Amara picked up her suitcase but paused before leaving. This was the moment, the final moment, where the last illusion might cling, the final tenderness might surface, the memory of what was might fight to remain. But when she looked at him, she saw only the echo of a story that had already ended. "Goodbye, Elias." The words were soft, not bitter, not weighted, just truth. She walked to the door, opened it, stepped through, and did not look back. The hallway outside was quiet. The elevator descended smoothly. The city greeted her with indifferent wind and the distant sound of traffic. And yet, everything felt new. The illusion had broken. And beneath it, she found herself intact. The city was already gathering itself into the pulse of mid-morning when Amara stepped outside. Wind rolled off Lake Michigan in cool, insistent waves, threading through her hair, stirring the hem of her coat. Cars hummed along the boulevard. Footsteps moved with purpose. Life continued, indifferent to personal endings. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, suitcase at her side, the air sharp with the faint scent of rain that had not yet fallen. There are moments when the world seems to pause, as though waiting for you to choose what comes next. Amara reached into her coat pocket and drew out her phone. Her fingers hovered for only a breath, not hesitation, simply recognition. She knew who she needed to call. She had known since the night before, when the ballroom lights fractured across crystal and truth revealed itself in the shine. There had always been one person in her life who saw her without expectation, without projection, without agenda. Someone who loved her not only for her brilliance, but for the quiet depths beneath it. Marisol Vega. She dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Then, "Amara?" Her voice, warm, steady, carried across an ocean like a hand extended. Amara closed her eyes. The morning, the city, the ache, everything softened. "Hi," she said, and though the word was small, something inside it opened like a door being unlocked for the first time in a very long time. Marisol did not ask the polite questions. She had always been a woman who understood before being told. What happened? The simplicity of the question did not ask for proof or explanation. It simply offered room. Amara stepped to the edge of the sidewalk, letting the world move around her. "It's over," she said. "I left." A soft breath on the other end. Not surprise, not pity, something like confirmation. "Good," Marisol replied, not unkindly. "He's been losing you for years." Amara's throat tightened, not with pain, but with recognition of something true spoken aloud. She leaned against a railing, the metal cool beneath her palm, her voice steady when she replied, "I thought I had more time to fix it, or to understand it, or to be enough for what he wanted." "No," Marisol said, the word gentle yet resolute. "You were always enough." He was simply small. Amara didn't cry. The tears had already fallen the night before, silently, on the kitchen floor, when grief had burned its way through her and left clarity in its wake. She looked upward now, toward a sky softening into pale gold. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life fighting for my own existence in someone else's narrative," she said. "Then don't," Marisol replied. "Come to Barcelona. Stay with me. Rest. Begin again where the world is wide enough for your full voice." The words were not rescue. They were invitation. Barcelona. She could almost feel it. Warm stone streets, lavender in the air, sea salt carried on the wind. A city that moved not with urgency, but with rhythm. She had always admired the way Marisol lived. Unapologetically, expansively, with a kind of elegance that was not performed, but embodied. "Marisol," Amara murmured, I don't know who I am without all of this. Yes, you do, her friend replied. You just haven't had space to hear yourself in years. The truth of that settled over her gently, like a shawl placed around her shoulders. I still have to handle the company, Amara said, though even now her voice lacked the strain of responsibility she once felt. The negotiations, the settlement, the— Simone Laurent, Marisol interrupted. I'll call her today. She's the one you want. She doesn't lose. The edges of Amara's lips lifted. No real smile yet, but something that remembered how. You always have a plan, she said softly. Only for women worth planning for, Marisol replied. Amara exhaled, and the breath felt like release. She looked at the city one more time, its tall steel and glass, its corners where she once built futures, its streets that carried both beginning and end. There was love here, yes, and pain, and history, but there was no longer belonging. Book the ticket, Amara said. There was no tremor in her voice, no uncertainty, only decision, only truth, only the quiet, steady return of light. I'll see you soon, Marisol replied, warmth like a sunrise breaking. Amara ended the call. The world did not shift dramatically, but something within her had already begun to move, not away from something, but toward herself. The apartment was quiet when Amara returned, quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as though silence itself had been waiting for her. The penthouse had always been filled with sound, the faint hum of Elias typing late into the night, the murmur of conference calls pouring through closed office doors, the clink of glasses shared between their moments of celebration. Even their arguments had once carried life, a crackling intensity that meant something still lived between them. But now the rooms were still and watching. Amara stepped inside and closed the door gently behind her. The soft click of the latch seemed too loud. Her suitcase sat by the entryway where she had left it that morning, a quiet testament to a decision too large to fit within the space it occupied. She walked slowly through the apartment, touching nothing, absorbing everything. The living room, sleek furniture, framed abstract prints, glass-topped tables, felt staged, as though it had been curated for guests rather than lived in. How strange, she thought, that her own home looked like a place designed for anyone except her. She crossed into the kitchen. The marble counter gleamed. The fridge hummed. The overhead lights cast a soft, diffused glow. There was a time she had cooked here, spices layered with instinct, laughter spilling easily across the room. Elias had always stood beside her then, slicing vegetables poorly, complaining theatrically, making her laugh. He had kissed her shoulders while steam rose from simmering pots. Those memories still existed. They had simply grown out of place. Amara opened a cupboard without knowing why. Inside, neatly stacked plates, all white, all identical. No history, no warmth, no story. Her hand trembled then, just barely. She closed the cupboard and leaned forward, palms pressing into the cool marble of the countertop. Her breath hitched, not sharp, not panic, just uneven, as though her lungs had momentarily forgotten how to carry her. The silence pressed closer, settling on her shoulders like weight. She had been composed all morning, composed when she walked out of the ballroom, composed when she packed her suitcase, composed when she looked Elias in the eye and said goodbye. But composition is not strength, it is containment, and containment always has a breaking point. Her knees bent without command and she lowered herself to the floor, slowly, carefully, as though her body understood before she did that she would not be rising again soon. She sat with her back against the lower cupboards, the cold tile pressing through the thin fabric of her slacks. Her hands slid into her lap, fingers curling slightly, as though grasping for something that was no longer there. Her breath trembled. Then again, then again. No tears came yet, only the sensation of something enormous shifting inside her, a tide pulling back so far the ocean forgot itself. She stared forward, at nothing, at everything. And then, quietly, without drama, without sound, she broke. The first tear did not fall down her cheek. It gathered in her eye and spilled, straight down, like a drop of rain released from a leaf. Then another, and another. Soon there was no separation between tears and breath, no distinction between grief and release. She pressed the heel of her hand to her lips, not to silence herself, There was no sound to silence, only to contain the shaking that rose like a soft storm beneath her ribs. This was not heartbreak. Heartbreak assumes something remains to shatter. This was mourning, a private burial of a version of herself, the woman who had stayed, who had softened herself into the shape of love, who had believed that devotion could hold the line against erasure, the woman who had dimmed, who had waited to be seen, who had hoped. Amara cried until her body grew heavy, until her breath slowed, until the space inside her, once crowded with ache, opened into something vast and strangely quiet. When the tears finally subsided, she lifted her head. Her face was damp, her throat raw, her breath unsteady, but she was still herself. And that mattered. Not the polished self, not the strategic self, not the composed self, the self beneath all of it. She sat there for a long time, not trying to rise, not trying to rebuild, simply existing in the fullness of what the moment demanded. Eventually, with the gentleness of someone relearning movement, she reached up and turned off the kitchen light. Darkness filled the apartment, not frightening, not consuming, just honest. The silence remained, but it no longer pressed against her. It rested beside her, companion rather than weight. And in that darkness, in that stillness, in the quiet after everything had come undone, something small and steady flickered to life inside her. Not hope, not yet, but self, the first spark of it, the beginning of its return. Morning light came softly, filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows in thin golden ribbons. It fell across the hardwood floors, across the half-packed shelves, across the quiet apartment that no longer held anything of her. The silence was no longer heavy now. It was simply present, like something that had done its work and stepped aside. Amara stood near the window, arms folded loosely around herself, watching the city below come alive. People moved along sidewalks with coffee cups in hand, unaware that a life was being left behind several stories above their heads. A taxi honked. A bus exhaled. Somewhere, a dog barked. Everything ordinary, everything unchanged. Everything changed. Her suitcase waited by the door, the same suitcase that had once carried her belongings when she moved into this home in the first place. Back then, she had carried it with hope. Today, she carried it with clarity. There was no reason to write a note, no reason to give last words. They had already been spoken, quietly, truthfully, and finally. Amara took one last walk through the apartment, not to remember but to acknowledge. Each room felt like a page she was gently closing. The living room, where they once shared takeout on the floor, laughing at nothing, dreaming in half sentences. The office, where Elias had begun to keep his door closed. The bedroom, where distance had first settled between their breaths. The kitchen, where she had broken open and found herself on the other side. She paused at the threshold, letting memory pass through her like a tide that no longer swept her away. There was no yearning left, just completion. She lifted the suitcase handle and stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and she did not turn back. 10. The elevator ride down was smooth, quiet. Amara watched her reflection in the mirrored walls, her posture straight, her eyes steady. Not untouched by pain, but no longer defined by it. She looked like someone returning to her own shape. When the doors opened, the lobby buzzed with weekday rhythm. A concierge greeted her with a polite nod. She returned the gesture. No explanation was needed. Outside, the sky was clear. Early sunlight glinted off the lake, turning the water into sheets of moving silver. A taxi approached as if summoned by intention rather than chance. She opened the door and slid inside. "Where to?" the driver asked. "O'Hare," she replied, her voice soft but unwavering. The city rolled by in passing frames. Steel, glass, brick, murals that stretched across alley walls. The familiar choreography of pedestrians and rushing cars. Chicago had been a beginning once. Now it was a chapter. A place where she had learned both devotion and erasure. A place that had shaped her, and a place she had outgrown. She rested her forehead lightly against the window and allowed herself to breathe deeply, not with effort, but with release. At the airport, movement replaced thought. Check-in, security boarding, the steady procession of leaving. She found her seat by the window. The plane hummed with anticipation, that quiet collective moment when everyone is suspended between where they have been and where they are going. As the plane began its ascent, Chicago spread out beneath her, streets forming a grid, the lake a vast, shimmering expanse, the skyline rising like glass monuments to ambition. From this distance, everything looked small, contained, knowable. She did not feel loss. She felt distance, and distance was freedom. The clouds gathered around the plane like pale, soft waves. Light flooded through the cabin, warm and diffused, wrapping her in something almost tender. She closed her eyes. Between wakefulness and rest, memory floated like drifting light. Marisol's voice, Barcelona's promise, the curve of a new horizon. Amara exhaled slowly, and with that breath, she let the last remnants of the old story fall away. She was not running away. She was returning to the woman she had once allowed herself to forget. The plane steadied at cruising altitude. Sunlight poured through the window like blessing. And somewhere deep within her, not loud, not blazing, just steady, a beginning unfurled. Barcelona met her with light. Not the sharp, insistent brightness of Chicago's skyline sunrise, but something warmer, gold softened by sea breeze, diffused by centuries-old stone and terracotta rooftops. The city did not rush. It unfolded, slowly, generously, as though it had time, as though she had time. Amara stepped out of the taxi in front of Marisol's building, suitcase rolling behind her. The street was narrow, paved in uneven stones polished by years of footsteps. Bougainvillea cascaded down balconies in heavy pink blossoms, and the scent of coffee drifted from a cafe whose windows were thrown open to the morning. Everything felt alive here. Not loud, not urgent, just undeniably quietly alive. Marisol appeared in the doorway before Amara could knock. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back loosely, her presence graceful and unforced. Some people carried power like a monument, unmoving, imposing. Marisol carried hers like a current. You only noticed it after it had already moved something inside you. She didn't speak. She simply wrapped her arms around Amara and held her for a long, steady moment. No explanations, no retellings, no questions. There are griefs that heal only when witnessed without analysis. When they finally separated, Marisol's eyes softened. "Welcome home," she said. The words did not sting. They did not feel premature. They felt like truth arriving gently. Hot times. The apartment was wide-windowed, sunlit, with white walls and minimalist decor warmed by textiles of deep ochre and indigo. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and sea salt, the scent of something new, but not unfamiliar. Amara unpacked slowly, not because she needed to, but because she wanted the act to mean something. She folded her clothes into drawers. She placed her notebooks on a desk near the window that overlooked the street below. She set her grandmother's gold locket on the bedside table, letting it claim space again, not as memory, but as inheritance. When she finished, she sat by the window and watched the city move beneath her. A couple walked hand in hand. A woman carried a basket of fresh oranges. An old man leaned out of his balcony window singing softly to no one, or perhaps everyone. Life did not look new here. Life looked whole, and she found, deep in herself, a quiet readiness to step into it. This is the new world. Days began to find rhythm. Not routine, not yet, but rhythm. In the mornings, Amara walked with Marisol to a local market, where vendors set out olives, marinated with lemon rind, crusted wheels of cheese, figs bursting with sweetness, and fresh bread still warm from ovens. They spoke little. The city spoke enough for both of them. In the afternoons, she wandered alone through the Gothic quarter, hands tucked in her pockets, letting the city teach her its language through texture, echo, color. Stone archways that had weathered centuries, narrow corridors that turned and turned as though revealing the city by invitation rather than map. A violin played somewhere distant, the notes bending with the wind. She noticed things here she had forgotten to notice elsewhere. The softness of human voices, the patience of a slow meal, the way strangers meet eyes without caution. She felt the world widen inside her. Their last year, and yet, Barcelona did not erase the past. It simply gave her the space to re-see it. At night, Amara would sit by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, notebook open, pen resting lightly in her hand. She would write, not lists, not strategies, not models, but small things. I remembered how to breathe today. I walked without shrinking. I spoke to myself without apology. Sometimes the words were simpler still. I am here. She did not write about Elias, not because she couldn't, but because she no longer needed to. The past had already taken its shape. The future was the part still being written. The couple of Dover. One evening, after several weeks, Marisol joined her on the rooftop terrace. The city stretched out below, rooftops blushing in the soft indigo of dusk. The Mediterranean wind swept through, carrying faint laughter from a nearby courtyard. Marisol poured wine into 2 glasses, her movements unhurried. You're returning to yourself, she observed. Amara considered this, her gaze on the horizon where the sea met the sky. No, she said softly. I'm learning myself for the first time. The difference was subtle, but Marisol understood immediately. The woman who had once adjusted herself to be palatable, acceptable, unthreatening, she was gone now. Not vanished, transformed. What remained was something whole, something sovereign. Marisol raised her glass slightly. To beginnings that don't ask permission. Amara lifted hers in return. The glass caught the dying light, glowing amber. Their glasses touched, and the city, with its ancient stones and ageless sky, seemed to exhale. Today is going to... Barcelona did not heal her. She healed in Barcelona, step by step, breath by breath, in the quiet architecture of days allowed to belong wholly to her. What she did not yet know was that this city, gentle though it was preparing her for return, for strategy, for reclamation, for the part of her story that had not yet unfolded. But for now, she simply sat, watching the evening fade into night, and allowed herself to feel full. Not finished, not victorious, just present and alive. Barcelona had begun to feel like memory in motion. Sun-warmed stone beneath Amara's feet, sea wind threading through her hair, the rhythm of the city syncing slowly with the rhythm of her breath. Days stretched, unhurried, and in their softness, she found room to think without unraveling. And then, one afternoon, as she sat in a quiet cafe overlooking a plaza where children chased pigeons and old men argued over chess, her phone buzzed. Not an American number, not a number she recognized. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but something in her, intuition perhaps, opened her hand instead of closing it. She answered, Amara? The voice was soft, delicate. Vivian Hale. The world did not tilt. Her heart did not race. There was only a stillness, like a page turning. Hello, Amara replied, her voice steady. I hope this isn't unwelcome, Vivian began. I hesitated, but I felt it was necessary. Amara stirred the spoon in her coffee once, slowly, though she no longer tasted anything. What do you need to say? There was a quiet breath on the other end, the kind taken before speaking a truth one has held too long. He told me you were separated, Vivian said, voice fragile but clear. He told me your marriage was over long before I came into the picture. He told me you were only staying to keep up appearances. I didn't know. I would never. Amara closed her eyes, not to shut out the words, but to hold them more fully. She believed her, not because she was generous and not because she was naive, but because something in Vivian's tone was unmistakably human, and because Elias had always been meticulous with narrative. You didn't owe him disbelief, Amara said. He's persuasive. Vivian exhaled, the sound brittle around its edges. I admired you, she confessed. Before I even knew who you were, I admired the mind behind his company's foundation. When I learned it was you, I thought I could understand him. I thought I saw something honest in him. And now, she stopped, a breath, the sound of glass being set softly on a table, the faint murmur of her world moving behind her. I realized I was filling in emptiness with what I wanted to see, she whispered. There was no triumph for Amara in this moment, no satisfaction, no reclaiming of superiority. Only 2 women standing on either side of the same wound, seeing it from different angles. Vivian, Amara murmured. You don't need to explain yourself to me. I do, Vivian insisted, voice trembling, because I know what it feels like to be erased. and I don't want to be part of your erasure." The words hung there, soft, unexpected, and disarming. Amara looked out into the plaza. A mother lifted a child into her arms. A vendor arranged fresh flowers in metal pails. Life continued, unbroken. "I'm not angry with you," she said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was exhalation, relief, grief, and recognition tangled together. "You loved him," Vivian said quietly. "I believed in him," Amara answered. "It's not the same. Love can survive imperfection. Belief requires truth." Vivian didn't speak, but Amara could feel the understanding settle on the other end like evening light. "Amara," Vivian said finally, "the night of the gala, he didn't tell me you were still together. I only found out when your expression changed as you looked at us. I realized what I had become in that moment, and I have lived with that every day since." Amara felt the faint ache of that memory, the way silence had been her shield, her dignity, her refusal to collapse publicly. "You are not responsible for the story he wrote," she said gently. Vivian exhaled, and this time the breath broke. Just slightly, but Amara heard it. "Pain recognizes itself. If there is anything I can do," Vivian offered, voice steadying, "anything you need, documents, testimony, timeline, I will not protect his story. He doesn't deserve protection." Amara didn't answer right away, not because she was unsure, but because she understood what it meant for someone to confront their own illusions, and because she knew this moment was not about strategy. It was about humanity. Finally, she said, "Thank you, Vivian. No more, no less." Vivian's voice softened. I hope you find something that loves you without asking you to shrink." Amara's throat tightened, not with grief, but with recognition of truth spoken gently. "I will." They did not say goodbye. The call simply ended. Amara sat for a long time in the cafe, watching the late afternoon sun cast warm gold across the plaza stones. The world looked the same, but something had shifted. Not because of Elias, not because of betrayal, not because of restitution or revenge, but because two women, once positioned as rivals in a narrative neither wrote, had chosen recognition instead of war. And in that choice, something in Amara's heart loosened, quietly, like the first door opening inside a long-locked house, a place she had thought she would never return to again. Compassion, not for him, for herself. Barcelona was a city that encouraged attentiveness, not through urgency, but through invitation. Days unfurled at a pace that made room for thought, for awareness, for the kind of noticing that life in Chicago had never allowed. Amara found herself re-entering her mind as though it were a room she had once stepped out of in distraction. And now, she stepped back inside. The new office was on the third floor of a restored stone building near Plaza de la Villa. Its windows opened onto a narrow street where laundry swayed from wrought iron balconies and conversations happened across open windows like melodies tossed between friends. The space was modest. Clean white walls, tall ceilings, and two long wooden tables that bore the marks of past work. It was not grand. It was purposeful. Marisol stood at one of the tables, reviewing a set of documents with a pen tucked behind her ear. Her posture was relaxed, but her mind, Amara knew, was sharpened to the finest point. "We'll begin with 10 founders," Marisol said, offering Amara a dossier. "Women of color, immigrants, innovators who have been told not yet by every room they deserve to walk into." Amara opened the folder and scanned the profiles. Engineers, designers, biochemists, educators, women with brilliance that had been consistently underestimated. Something surged in her chest, familiar but now unbound by anyone else's permission. This was where strategy lived. This was where she lived. "We'll do more than fund them," Amara said, her voice quiet but carrying weight. "We'll build structures around them so they don't have to shrink to be accepted." Marisol nodded. "This will require precision, intention, patience." Amara smiled, small, deliberate. "I know." Her hands had always been capable of building. She had simply spent too long building someone else's legacy. Now her work would have her name. Comments. Their days took on rhythm, mornings spent evaluating pitches, Amara discerning the architecture of ideas with mathematical grace, Marisol assessing leadership and resilience with intuitive accuracy. Afternoons meeting founders, listening deeply, not to the polish of presentation, but to the quiet conviction underneath. Evenings drafting strategy maps, long arcs of growth, funding ladders, storytelling frameworks for public narrative, roadmaps designed not to impress but to endure. Amara's notebooks filled quickly, pages of diagrams, annotated assumptions, cost projections, timeline cascades. Her handwriting remained elegant, sharp, controlled, but something new lived in the strokes. Unrestricted ownership. She could feel herself expanding again, not outward, but inward, filling spaces that once echoed. One afternoon, a young founder named Lena presented her prototype, a medical textile infused with antimicrobial properties inspired by indigenous weaving patterns. Her voice shook slightly when she spoke, not from lack of confidence, but from years of speaking to rooms that did not expect her brilliance. Amara listened without interrupting. When Lena finished, she rested her hands lightly on the table. "You're not asking permission," Amara said. "You're offering a solution the market is not mature enough to recognize yet. Our job is not to make them ready. Our job is to show them they have already arrived late." Lena blinked, breath unsteady, because she understood, because she was understood. The investment decision was made without hesitation. Amara felt something bloom inside. It was not pride. It was alignment. This was the work she had been trying to do all along, even when she did not have the space to allow it to take form. As weeks passed, Barcelona continued to shape her, not as a refuge, but as a crucible. She had expected rebuilding to feel like effort. Instead, it felt like precision, like the steady placing of stones in a structure that had always been designed, waiting to be assembled. She was not escaping the past. She was articulating it, drawing a line, separating legacy from illusion. Times in play. One evening, Marisol found Amara still at the office, standing before a wide window overlooking the city as dusk fell in lavender strokes. Papers lay spread across the table in neat, intentional arrangement. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the courtyard below. "You're working late again," Marisol observed, leaning against the doorway. Amara didn't turn. "This doesn't feel like work. It feels like restoration." Marisol smiled, soft, knowing. "Do you want to talk about him?" she asked. Amara shook her head, not in avoidance but in clarity. "He's no longer the center of the story," she said. "He's just a chapter. And chapters end." The room held the words gently, honoring them. Outside, church bells called evening into being. Inside, Amara returned to her papers, not with urgency, but with earned stillness. Every calculation was a reclamation. Every plan was a declaration. Every step forward was a refusal to disappear. She was rebuilding. Not from ruin, but from remembrance, from precision, from intelligence, from inheritance, from herself. Autumn arrived quietly in Barcelona, not with the sharp chill of Chicago, but with a gentle cooling of evenings, the scent of roasted chestnuts curling through narrow streets, and the slow shifting of sunlight into a deeper, honeyed gold. Amara felt the seasons settle around her like a second skin, balanced, rooted, ready. She had rebuilt her center. Now it was time to reclaim her name. The first indication came in the form of a news alert. Ward Technologies announces major product expansion. CEO credits singular leadership vision. Singular. The word slid across her screen like a blade drawn with deliberate care. It did not wound, she was past pain, but it cut away the final illusions of courtesy or restraint. Elias was not content to erase her privately. He was shaping history, ensuring her absence would appear inevitable. Behind her, Marisol read over her shoulder, expression composed. "He expects silence," she said. Amara closed the article. "He will not have it." Marisol nodded once, then placed a folder on the table. "Simone arrives tomorrow." W8 daughter. Simone Laurent moved like someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to be heard. Tall, sharply dressed, with eyes that saw through narrative before words were even spoken, she entered the office with the calm presence of a surgeon. Precision, intent, no wasted motion. She took a seat across from Amara and folded her hands, the silver rings on her fingers catching the afternoon light. "Before we begin," Simone said, "I want to be clear. This is not a battle of feeling. It is a battle of fact. Emotion is a river. Documents are stone. We build with stone. Amara inclined her head. I understand, but she did understand, deeply. Fact had always been her language. Simone opened a leather-bound planner. We begin by reconstructing your involvement from the first day of conception. Dates, emails, financial transfers, strategy decks. Verbal agreements are sound, but written evidence is irrefutable. Amara slid a box across the table. Meticulously organized folders, color-coded tabs, time-stamped drafts. Simone's brows lifted, just slightly. You came prepared. I've been prepared for years, Amara replied quietly. I just didn't know who I would need to be when this moment came. Simone's gaze warmed. Respect, not sympathy. Then this will be efficient. Topnik. The work unfolded like the quiet tightening of a net. Emails with her bullet-pointed growth forecasts. Early contract drafts with her signature beside his. Seed funding transfers in amounts that had nearly emptied her personal account. Photographs of whiteboards from when the company was only an idea. Her handwriting framing every major pivot. Fact, fact, fact. Proof that could not be softened, rewritten, or reasoned away. In the evenings, Amara would stand at the balcony as the city glowed below, listening to the distant roll of ocean against shore. She did not doubt. She did not regret. She did not hesitate. She simply waited for the right moment. It arrived without announcement. A couple of 3 weeks later, Elias called. Amara let the phone ring once, twice, then answered. Amara, he said, voice carefully steady, we don't need attorneys. We can handle this between us. Simone had warned her of this. He will come to you first as familiarity, then as reason, then as pressure. Amara moved to the window, watching the street below where a guitarist played soft flamenco. I'm not interested in handling what already belongs to me, she said. I am interested in accuracy. His breath hitched, just slightly. Not from guilt, from control slipping. You're being vindictive, he said. No, she replied, voice even. I am being factual. Silence swelled on the line, the kind that reveals everything. You don't have to do this, he tried again, softer now. We shared a life. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to remember with precision. Yes, she said, and I will not allow you to rewrite it. She ended the call. The line did not need to ring again. Today that we're going. The next step was public record. Simone filed the petition. Formal co-founder recognition and restored equity percentage. Elegant, unassailable, perfectly timed. The board of Ward Technologies received the documents 2 days later. Investors had questions. Shareholders had concerns. And the story Elias had crafted so carefully began to unravel. Not in scandal, but in quiet, undeniable exposure. Not accusation, not spectacle, just truth. Amara did not watch it unfold with triumph. She did not want revenge. She wanted accuracy. She wanted her work to bear her name. She wanted her legacy to stand upright. And it would. That's 14 years. One evening, as she and Marisol reviewed the final statements to be released to the international business press, Marisol spoke without looking up. You're not fighting him, she said. You're correcting the record. Amara nodded. Yes. And for the first time, not since the marriage, not since the leaving, but since long before, Amara felt something settle inside her. Not a flame, not a storm, something steadier, authority. Her own, fully reclaimed, undiminished. It began with a headline. Not loud, not scandalized, not sensational. Just precise. The unsung architect of Ward Technologies. Amara Cole's quiet brilliance. The article appeared in the Financial Times first, written by a journalist known for her exacting research and unwillingness to bend a corporate myth. From there, the story rippled outward. Bloomberg, The Atlantic, Business Today, and then the inevitable whirlwind of social commentary. But the most striking part was not the coverage. It was the tone. There was no tone of pity, no narrative of victimhood, no framing of romantic betrayal as the heart of the story. The world was not looking at Amara as the abandoned wife of a great man. The world was looking at her as the mind that built half an empire. Statements that had once been erased, diminished, or attributed elsewhere now appeared in print. Dated timelines, original financial projections, photographs of whiteboard sessions where her handwriting surrounded every decisive pivot. Her contributions were not just acknowledged, they were placed in sequence, in context, in history. The truth, once threaded carefully through private memory, was now woven into public record. Elias's narrative, sleek, curated, immaculate, began to fray. Not in outrage, in correction. The Board of Ward Technologies issued a statement 3 days later. We acknowledge the foundational role Ms. Amara Cole played in the conceptualization and strategic development of the company. Discussions are ongoing to ensure that recognition is formally and appropriately represented. It was the kind of statement that corporations release only when they have no alternative left. Even then, the words felt cautious, measured, late, but they were enough, because the world read between lines more fluently than most executives understood. Investors began asking questions, not whispered, but direct. Where was she in the public narrative? Why had her role been omitted? What else had been shaped into silence? Elias's team worked quickly to manage optics, but public opinion, once awakened, moves like weather, not predictable, not containable. Interviews from former colleagues surfaced. Testimonials, archived communications, photos from early days in cramped co-working spaces, where Amara's posture and presence spoke in ways no headline could dilute. She was no longer invisible. She had become inevitable. Back in Barcelona, the office remained steady, untouched by the noise. Amara continued her work, her focus unwavering. She made tea in the mornings, reviewed proposals, held meetings with founders who were now watching her with new understanding. Not awe, but alignment. She had lived the story they feared, to be erased while standing in the center of one's own creation. And now she was showing them another story, to return, without apology. One afternoon, during an ordinary strategy review, Marisol looked up from her laptop. "You've seen the stock," she said. Amara didn't ask. She didn't need to. Ward Technologies had dipped, not catastrophically, but enough to be noticed, enough to signal instability, enough to remind everyone that narrative, not product, not innovation, not valuation, was the real architecture of power. A story built without truth cannot hold its weight. Amara rested her fingertips lightly on the edge of the desk. "This was never about destroying the company," she said. Marisol nodded. "No, it was about returning its missing center of gravity." Outside, the sky had shifted into late afternoon gold, drifting warm light across the office walls. $5. Not every reaction was public. Some came quietly. A renowned VC in San Francisco emailed, "If you ever decide to return stateside, there is a seat for you." A Women in Leadership Symposium requested her as keynote speaker. A graduate business program asked whether she would consider shaping a curriculum. Doors opened, not because they were newly available, but because they had finally been unlocked. Amara read each message, responded thoughtfully, accepted nothing yet. Her future was not going to be reaction. Her future would be deliberate. Combinating. One evening, as the city glowed in twilight, Amara walked slowly along Barceloneta Beach. The sea was calm, rolling in soft breaths against the sand. The sky bloomed in watercolor shades of violet and apricot, the moon already rising, silver and unbothered. Children laughed somewhere behind her. A guitar drifted from a beachfront cafe. Salt touched the air. She walked as though the world was expanding under her feet. The world had taken notice. But she did not rise because they looked. She rose because she had always been rising, quietly, steadily, even when unseen. Recognition was not the victory. Returning to herself was. The negotiation unfolded not in courtrooms or boardrooms. Those were too crowded with performance. Instead, it took place in a private conference suite, overlooking the Chicago River, where glass walls reflected the city in cool strips of silver and steel. A city she once knew intimately, a city she now observed with distance. Amara entered with Simone beside her, not armored, not hardened, simply whole. Her steps were measured, not to signify power, but presence. Elias was already seated at the long obsidian table. His suit was immaculate, his hair carefully styled, his posture composed. But beneath the polished exterior, something restless flickered. A man aware that the narrative he once authored was no longer held in his hands. He rose when Amara approached, out of habit more than courtesy. "Amara," he said quietly. She gave a soft nod. No warmth, no coldness, just truth. Simone placed a folder on the table and sat. "We'll begin with recognition." Elias's counsel adjusted his glasses. "We are willing to acknowledge Ms. Cole's early involvement in the company." Simone's gaze was steady, precise, unyielding. "Not involvement," she corrected. "Co-founding." A silence followed, brief but weighted. The attorney cleared his throat. "Co-founder status is possible under certain phrasing within public documentation, provided." Amara spoke then, gently interrupting. "There is no phrasing in which the truth requires qualification." Elias exhaled, a subtle unraveling in his shoulders. He knew. He always had. They moved through the terms. Official co-founder designation. Not buried in footnotes, not implied, declared. Equity restoration. Her original ownership percentage reinstated, recalculated to match current valuation. A number that represented not generosity, but accuracy. Board seat. Not for power, for presence. For memory carved into the architecture of the company she built. The clause. Simone slid a page forward. No retraction of public acknowledgement. No revision. No narrative realignment. Permanence of credit. Irrevocable. Elias's attorney hesitated. "This limits future strategic messaging. It protects reality," Simone replied. Amara said nothing. She didn't need to. Elias looked at her. Really looked. Not at the woman he once loved. Not at the woman he had tried to shrink. But at the woman who had outgrown every room he ever tried to confine her to. There was a flicker in his expression. Something like regret, but too late to be meaningful. "Amara," he murmured, "we could have fixed this together." She held his gaze steadily. "No," she said, "we could have prevented it together. But fixing it was always mine to do." He closed his eyes for a moment. Not in defeat, in recognition. The documents were signed. Ink against paper. Silent, unceremonious, final. A legacy restored in strokes that left no sound, but echoed all the same. When it was done, they stood alone for a moment, the lawyer stepping out, the city still humming beyond the glass. Elias spoke first. "You were always the stronger one." Amara's voice was soft but unwavering. "No, I was simply willing to lose what wasn't meant to stay in order to keep myself." He swallowed, jaw tightening. Not in anger, but in the painful acceptance of truth. "She loves me," he said, almost defensively, though it sounded more like confession. "I know," Amara replied, "and you may yet learn how to love her honestly." A pause. Not uncomfortable, not tender, just real. He nodded. Once, slowly, she turned to leave. The city stretched before her in a wash of late afternoon light. Glass and river, movement and history. Chicago did not feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a chapter, with its sentence finally complete. As the elevator doors slid closed, her reflection shone faintly in the mirrored panels. Not diminished, not triumphant, just whole. And she realized this was not victory. This was reclamation. She had not won back what was taken from her. She had named it, claimed it, placed it back in her hands where it belonged. Not to hold on to, but to carry forward. New York met her not with warmth, but with recognition. Sharp skyline lines, brisk wind funneling through avenues, the sound of a city that had never once paused for heartbreak or triumph. It was a place that assumed its inhabitants could keep pace or fall behind quietly. Amara stepped out of the black car in front of the Carnegie Summit Center, her coat gathered lightly at the waist, hair lifted by the November air. The building rose in clean, mirrored geometry, reflecting the clouds like moving brushstrokes. She had been here before, years ago, standing beside Elias, back when she believed history wrote itself through merit and devotion alone. Today she walked alone, but she did not feel singular. She felt sovereign. Inside, the lobby glowed in amber tones. Attendees moved through it in murmuring clusters. Investors, CEOs, policy architects, the kinds of people who spoke the language of scale and futures as second nature. Not one of them looked unfamiliar, not because she knew them, but because power always recognized itself. A staff member approached her with quiet professionalism. "Miss Cole, right this way." Her name, spoken without hesitation, without erasure, without footnote. She followed. .com/. The auditorium had already filled, a warm hum rising beneath the soft stage lights. At the center of the stage, in a navy suit perfected for the camera, stood Elias Ward. He was being introduced. A visionary founder, a pioneer in ethical AI markets, and recipient of the Global Innovators Honor. The applause rose like tidewater, controlled, well-timed, expected. Elias smiled, polished, measured, and stepped toward the podium. Amara slipped into a row near the aisle. No one noticed her at first. The room was focused forward, toward the story being told. Through the low golden light, Elias appeared almost untouched by the months past. But she saw it, the faint tension beneath his collar, the slight tautness between breaths, the shift of a man aware that his victory was no longer absolute. He began to speak. He spoke well. He always had. He spoke of perseverance, of innovation, of early years spent alone in uncertainty, building from nothing. Applause punctuated each carefully placed line. The audience leaned forward, absorbing the shape of the myth. Once, hearing these words would have hollowed her. Once, they would have turned her breath sharp, her pulse frantic, her memory burning. Now, they passed over her like wind against stone. Not because she was hardened, but because she was known to herself. As he continued, small heads in the row ahead turned. One, then another. Recognition does not arrive all at once. It unfolds, like something rising to the surface. Is that? It can't be. It is. The air shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly, like the first moment before a storm breaks. Elias paused, just briefly, as he saw the movement ripple. His eyes followed their gaze, searching the auditorium, and found her. He froze only for the length of a heartbeat. But a heartbeat is enough. Amara did not avert her gaze. She did not challenge. She did not soften. She simply existed, fully, and the room instinctively recalibrated. Something unspoken spread through the seats. History has arrived to watch itself be corrected. Elias swallowed, resumed his speech, but the rhythm had shifted. The performance thinned. The applause that followed sounded slightly uneven, hesitant, thoughtful, aware. He was thanked. The award was placed into his hand. The moment that should have crowned him had instead broadened the space around him, made visible what was missing. A moderator invited audience questions. A hand rose, then another, and then one voice, calm, unhurried. Mr. Ward, could you speak to Ms. Amara Cole's contributions to your early strategy framework? The documentation suggests. The room stilled. Elias drew breath, but the words did not come as smoothly now. And then Amara stood, not dramatically, not challengingly, simply rising into her full height, her presence unmistakable. She did not walk to the stage. She did not need to. She spoke from where she stood. Her voice was warm velvet, steady as architecture. Credit is not a matter of generosity, she said. It is a matter of truth. And truth is not something that shifts to accommodate comfort. It is something that remains. No accusation, no bitterness, just clarity. The room exhaled, quiet, awed, unprepared for grace where they expected fire. Elias's shoulders lowered, his gaze dropped, not in shame, but in recognition of something irreversible. She no longer lived in the story he tried to write for her. She lived in her own. Amara sat. The discussion resumed. But the room had changed shape. She was not the shadow. She was the axis. Topic of video. When the summit ended, she stepped back onto the street. The wind was crisp, humming with winter's edge. New York thrummed around her in its ceaseless momentum. But now, she walked in stride with it, not following, not chasing, not proving, simply moving. The past was no longer something she carried. It was something she had crossed. Night settled upon New York like a deep indigo silk, folding itself gently around the city's sharp edges. Lights shimmered across the Hudson, reflections trembling softly along the dark water's surface. The air held that particular kind of stillness that comes only after a day of revelation, when something once tightly knotted has finally loosened, its weight released. Amara walked, not hurried, not searching, just moving through the evening with a kind of quiet sovereignty, as though the city itself adjusted its rhythm to her stride. Her heels touched the pavement with steady cadence. Every breath was unhindered. Every step belonged to her. She passed store windows glowing with warm interiors, jazz drifting from an open bar doorway. The soft laughter of strangers carried lightly on the night air. Once, she might have rushed past these things, too consumed with building, supporting, proving, enduring. Now she let herself see them. The world was wide again. She paused at the edge of the river, where the railing overlooked the slow pulse of waves. The city skyline rose behind her, sharp, glittering, vivid. She rested her hands lightly on the cool metal rail. There had been a time when she believed love meant staying, a time when sacrifice felt synonymous with devotion, a time when dimming felt like loyalty. But she saw now, with unclouded clarity, love does not require shrinking, devotion does not require disappearance, and strength does not require silence. She had loved with an open hand, and when the moment came, she had released with the same grace. This was not triumph over someone else. This was triumph over forgetting herself. Her name had been restored, her work reclaimed, her story no longer borrowed or distorted. But more than recognition, she had returned to her own presence. The woman who once stood in crowded rooms, quiet but unseen, now stood alone beneath a city of lights and felt limitless. The river breeze brushed her cheek, carrying the faint scent of salt in winter. She closed her eyes, and the memory of Barcelona's sunlight mingled with Chicago's cold clarity, with New York's electric pulse. Her life was no longer a single place, a single identity, a single story. It was movement, reclamation, becoming. She thought of Marisol, her steadiness, her brilliance, her love without condition. She thought of Vivienne, vulnerable, sincere, a reminder that women did not have to be enemies inside a man's unfinished story. She thought of herself, not as she had been, but as she was now. Not returning, not rebuilding, but rising. A group of passers-by stepped near her, their voices soft and indistinct. One of them glanced at her with a flicker of recognition, not from headlines, but from presence. She returned the smallest nod, and the city moved on around her. The past was not a wound anymore, just a shape that had led her here. Amara breathed in deeply. The night felt endless and possible. She did not need to know the exact steps ahead. She did not need to carve certainty from the unknown. She only needed to walk forward, and she was already doing so. She pushed away from the railing and continued down the river path, her silhouette lengthening softly under streetlights. The moon followed her reflection in the water, steady and luminous. There was no music, but there was rhythm. Her rhythm. She had become the woman who did not ask for permission to exist. She had become the woman who knew herself without apology. She had become the woman who walked forward, not to escape the past, not to prove her worth, but because the world was wide, and she was ready for all of it. And somewhere, quietly, beautifully, the future opened. If Amara's journey touched you, if you felt her strength, her quiet reclamation, her rise, let this story continue. Like, comment, or follow to stay with us as we create more stories of women who stand, rise, and walk forward in their own power.